Hello, everybody. Welcome to Church at Home with Rachel for Feel Good Friday on the 30th of June. Tomorrow is our Canada Day. So in the United States, you have Independence Day. We celebrate Canada Day or Dominion Day here in Canada on the 1st of July. So tomorrow is our fireworks and our version of, Grandma's apple pie, things like that. I will be participating in a parade for St. Mary's Anglican Church in Edgerton because they have their annual sports days when they have a bolorama and sort of like a mini rodeo and all kinds of activities for kids and families. And the museum opens up, and it's just a great weekend. And Sunday we'll have our ecumenical worship at the fairgrounds, somewhat like we did last week in Wainwright, and we will at the end of July for Vermilion. So today is Feel Good Friday, and I wanted to talk a little about splainin. Do you remember, if you're a certain age, you're going to remember Ricky Ricardo, Lucy, you got some splaining to do? I remember growing up with that. I don't think my family used it, but I remember other people's families using it. It was kind of a tongue-in-cheek, you knew you weren't in trouble, but you were this close. Like, you weren't about to get grounded, but you were this close because whatever it was you did was just, you pushed the limit just a little too much. Kind of like Lucille Ball. And lately, I've noticed there's a lot of dad-splaining going on. Like people talk about dad jokes and then dad-splaining. And there's a commercial for, I think up here in Canada, I think it's for like real estate agents. There's a real push for people to sell their own houses. And the real estate boards are coming back with, this is why it's really important to not try to do that. Like we know all the legal ramifications and all this stuff. And at one point, there's a dad standing on the stairs with an ear to the wall. He's listening to the walls talk to him as his daughter and son-in-law or son and daughter-in-law are contemplating buying this house. And instead of getting a home inspection, dad is taking care of it. So there's all kinds of of stuff out there anymore about sort of how do we explain this to the older generation in a way that doesn't make them feel like idiots, but lets them know that we really think they are. No, I don't really think it's that bad. I'm just being sarcastic. Um, but this sort of splainin thing, it's like we got to figure out a way to explain something in language people can use. It's like talking to children in that high squeaky voice. Like you wouldn't understand this, but it's like they're probably looking at us like you're nuts. Talk to me in a normal voice because you're just giving me a headache. Or when we talk to people who don't speak English by yelling at them, like somehow yelling the words they don't understand is somehow going to penetrate their subconscious and some amazing um, you know vocabulary translator is going to switch on in their head because you were so loud. We do some really strange things in our efforts to communicate. And I got thinking about this the other day because I've had lots of comments. I did a video about 7.5 months ago, um, talking about Bo, the fifth column, and he was talking about the decline in churches. And it did well, and then it stopped, sort of, people watched it once in a while. And then a month ago, it just sort of spiked again, and it's leveling off again. But there's a lot of comments, and a lot of people are like, God, and, you don't need, who needs God, and there's science and all that stuff. And I find myself in this predicament where I feel the desire and the need to answer every comment, and I don't have time. And some of them just aren't worthy of commenting. Some of them, the comments are so astute that I'm not entirely sure how to comment and not look like an idiot because they're obviously really given what they're saying a lot of thought. And quite a few of them have, like, they're very intelligent thoughts, which is great. But I thought there's been times I've been tempted to God-splain, like to do the whole, well, dear, you're not intelligent enough to understand this because you don't have the faith, but. And then I realized how absolutely arrogant that sounds and reminds me of certain denominations in the world that sort of do that, sort of God-splaining, where they take this idea that, you're not really one of us and you really can't understand it because you haven't drunk our Kool-Aid yet. So we're going to explain it to you this way. This is who God is. God is this wonderful, wonderful old man up in the sky who sits in a holy high chair, and he has a big lightning bolt. And if you don't say the right things or believe the right things, he's going to smite you with it. He's going to send it down. He's going to nail you in the forehead with it, and you're going to be laying on the floor all shivering and scared and say, "Oh Lord, I'm sorry. I'm a poor sinner and I didn't know the wrongness of my doctrine and dogma. My theology is all messed up. Please forgive me, and how can I learn?" And then in swoop the angels of those churches that come with, "This is the word of the Lord, and it is absolutely perfect and inerrant." And when that part of you that gets shook, the shakes off the shock of being struck by lightning, comes back to you and says, "But wait a minute, when it says this in one chapter and it says this in another book, those are opposite. How do you understand that?" Then those angels of that denomination get all excited and they can't figure out, and they sort of start with the whole bashing you with the Bible. "If you're not going to read it and understand it properly, we're going to somehow make you get it by osmosis by hitting you with it." Of course, I'm being entirely facetious. There are Bible thumpers in the world. There are people who truly, truly do believe that the Bible is completely inerrant, and it is the completely divinely God reached down and took hold of the pen, the hand of the pen that the pen was writing with, and wrote out all these words, and they're exact truth. Now, if you're like me and you might have trouble understanding that kind of God-splaining, and you look at Bibles and realize that the different translations say things a little bit differently, and even within those translations they recognize in the footnotes that they're coming from different sources because there's more than one written copy of that, then you might kind of get like, "I don't know about that. That doesn't make sense to me." And then we're called back to this need to just take it on faith, just believe it because the pastor said so. If you're truly faithful, you will believe it because Pastor Rachael said that. That's got to be the truth. And then if you're really thinking, you're going to think, "Well, wait a minute. If Rachel's pastor, Rachel's a girl. Wait a minute. Rachael couldn't be a pastor in those denominations." I mean, it doesn't all start to make sense. It's like with the dad-splaining thing. It's great if your dad or your mom or your grandpa or your uncle or something want to come out with you and help you buy your house, and they can look around, or like they look at the foundation and they say, "Oh, that's just a little crack. That's just old age. That's okay." Or you go to buy a car, and the person you're with, their way of helping you explain that this car is good or not is by kicking the tires, looking under the hood, lifting the hood and looking at it, closing the hood and say, "Oh, it looks good to me." That kind of splaining isn't really helpful. What you need is someone who actually lives in that. So if you're looking to buy a house, you hire a home inspector. Somebody knows about foundations, that maybe that crack is simply the veneer they put on the outside of the foundation, make it look pretty, and it's cracked. But it could be that the whole foundation is cracked, or that there's water damage. Something that you don't know about, that if you buy that house, a year or two from now, you're going to have a really big bill and nowhere to turn to help you with it. Those listening to the walls with a glass. A home inspector can listen to the walls and recognize if there's mice in there or termites. They have things they can do because they know what they're doing. They're trained in what they do, and they dedicate their lives to doing it. Mechanics. I know mechanics get a bad rap. But when you're going to go and buy a car, especially a used car, not a bad idea to take a mechanic with you, or ask the dealership, "Can I take it and get it checked out by my own mechanic?" Because then you've got somebody that you can trust, someone that has been trained and can look at this and see what you can't see, and can say to you, it's in excellent shape. It's a used car, but it's in good shape. You're going to get hundreds of thousands of kilometers out of it, miles, whatever. Or they can say, it looks good. They've cleaned it up nicely, but that transmission's on its way out, or the carburetor's gone, or the catalytic converter isn't even in it. Big thing in Canada, catalytic converters. You need somebody who knows what they're doing to explain, not dad-splain. Same thing with faith. There's no way that any of us are just born knowing all that there is to know about God and Jesus Christ and the Bible and all those things, whether or not we're believers. Like, there's knowledge and then there's belief. So you can be someone who is very knowledgeable about these things and not believe. There are plenty of theological scholars who will admit that either they are not Christian or Muslim or Jewish or whatever, they just are fascinated by theology and study it. Or will admit that in their study of it, they've come across times when they're like, "I don't know. I don't know, that makes me think. I kind of wonder, what about this? What about that? Like I'm still not completely 100% on something because what they're studying makes them question. Making them question makes them reflect on their faith. There's nothing wrong with that. I think the problem is that when we start trying to share the faith with other people, and instead of saying, this is what I think, and this is why I think it, and this is why I'm comfortable in what I'm thinking, using I statements. Remember, always I statements. This is what I'm thinking. This is what I feel. And then when we say to somebody, rather than saying to somebody, this is what you have to think because this is what God said. This is what God meant. I think that's God-splaining. God is perfectly capable of speaking for God's self. And every once in a while in history, God has done so. We are not called to explain God, nor are we called to tell other people what God meant. And I mean, that sounds hypocritical because I get up there and I preach every Sunday and I do this and I talk about things. I'm always coming from a place of this is what I've experienced and this is what I've studied. And I hope that everybody understands that when I share something like that, it's because I prayed about it. I believe this is what God is sharing with me to share with you. But at any point, if you're thinking, I don't know about that, that's awesome. I want you to think. I want you to question. I don't want you to say, well, Rachel said it, so therefore it is true or it's not true. This is a truth that I'm sharing with you that I'm working through. Some of the truths that I'm working through, I've worked to a place where I really believe this is it. But there's lots of truths that, like, to be quite frank, in my sermons, I try to be a bit more like this is what we believe is the church. On my church at home stuff on Monday to Friday, this is me just sort of saying, like, this is what I'm working with. This is where I've come in my 52 years. This is from the stuff I've read and the experiences I've had and the people I've talked to. This is what I'm believing today. That could change. That's okay. But I think it's really important that we not God-splain. Because when we do that, if we come down and start God-splaining to people, we really probably do more damage than anything else. Because they're probably going to run screaming from us, thinking if that's what God's all about, I don't want anything to do with him. They're not necessarily going to be thinking, oh, that's interesting. And I really appreciate what that's, we need to be able to talk about our faith and recognize that it's our faith that we're sharing with others who may want to understand, might be willing to listen. And if they're not, we also have to recognize that we need to stop talking because we're not doing them any favors. And we're certainly not doing our faith or the faith world any favors. God-splaining, it's kind of like, Lucy, you got some splaining to do. I don't think God needs us to do some splaining for God. I think that God's encouraging us to live a life that lives the explanation of God's love for us, that other people's might say, hey, I think I'd like to have a conversation with God myself so God can explain God's self to me and I can learn from there. So, other than God-splaining and mansplaining and Ricky Ricardo's Lucy, you got some splaining to do? What other kinds of splaining is there out there? I really like to know because, I'm kind of living I live in a protected little world. I have no kids. I don't have any teenagers. I have none in my church. I'm really not up on what's happening with the younger generation. So if you have any idea, please let me know. Have a great weekend. God bless you. I will be here on Sunday for Gospel on the Go with another cover sermon because I will be doing an ecumenical service and don't have a sermon prepared for Sunday. But there will be something on Gospel on the Go for Sunday morning. But I'll be back on Monday for Church at Home with Rachel. Have a great weekend. God bless. And for those of you in Canada, happy Canada Day.